On to our next guest. Our next guest is Ronald L. Murphy Jr. Ron has professionally published short stories, poetry, had a play produced, and this, his first novella. A graduate of the University of Pittsburgh with a degree in literature, Ron studied medieval history at the graduate level at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. His interests include acting, playwriting, and photography. He lives in rural western Pennsylvania with his wife and 5 children. Without any further delay, let's get him on the phone. Ron, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk and the Fringe Radio Show.
Hey, sir, I'm honored to be here. Thank you very much for having me. I was looking forward to this for quite some time.
Well, we're honored to have you here too, Ron. I just touched, of course, on your bio, but why don't you give our listeners a little bit of the backstory, how you got into writing and on some of the topics that you write on?
Great question. I think that is an important question to ask any researcher into the paranormal. How did you get started? And I got started by not having any kind of particular encounter, but I got it basically through my mom, who was a great advocate of having an open mind and a creative imagination. So what had happened was back in the 1970s, there was a rash of Bigfoot sightings in the area of my little town of Blairsville, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. It's a town of about 3,000 people. Nothing ever happened there. But all of a sudden, on the nightly evening news, there were reports of Bigfoot sightings in my town.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was great for a kid. Now, I'll tell you, this was at a time whenever innocence still existed. Saturday mornings were cartoons, and then there were going to be the little horror shows, and sometimes, every now and then, about 2 times, 3 times a year, the Legend of Boggy Creek would be on there.
Oh, yeah.
So my young, fertile imagination is just booming at this time. And now we had Bigfoot in our very backyard, and my mother would load my brother and I up into the big old Buick, and we would go the back roads of western Pennsylvania looking for Bigfoot. Now, we never came across him or anything, but that was instilled in me at a very early age, from about the age of 6 or 7, that something beyond our knowledge may exist right beyond the boundaries of civilization. So that's how I first got started in my love for the unknown. And
Gotcha.
then I went to college. I went to the University of Pittsburgh, a very big urban school, and I studied medieval literature, like you had said. And I came across a lot of these archetypal characters. You know, you see the Grendel in the Beowulf saga. And going back to the very beginning of literature, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, we have the character of Enkidu, which is this hairy wild man, which if you would write it up today, it would look like a Bigfoot encounter that you would have, going on out in the Pacific Northwest. These were amazing stories. And again, my imagination starts, igniting once more with this fervor for the unknown. But it was actually in graduate school that everything came together. And a professor of mine by the name of John Hanson, he studied at the University of London. He was actually showing slides of medieval manuscripts up on the board. And in the marginalia of one of the illuminated manuscripts was the figure of the wild man, the woodwose. And he took his little pointer and he showed us, and he said, and there you have a Bigfoot. Now, he said this very tongue-in-cheek, but again, that's actually what it was. It was a bipedal hairy hominoid that was the traditional Bigfoot figure. So, at the age of about 26 years old, I finally came to the conclusion that you could study the paranormal from a very academic point of view, and not necessarily be laughed out of the room. So I have endeavored for the past couple of decades to study from a very scientific perspective, in case anything is actually uncovered, that any evidence that I may gather can be scrutinized from a scientific aspect.
Interesting. Well, and that's especially Ron, with the Bigfoot. I think that has been so elusive. These creatures have been so elusive because, so many people have reported seeing something And of course, there are a couple of pictures that I think there's so few pictures, researchers just punch holes in everything. But it's an elusive creature, whether, and of course there's some people that say, could it be an interdimensional creature that moves in and out of dimensions, because these things seem to appear and then disappear. Of course there's the famous senior moment, the film of the Bigfoot walking in California, but nobody could seem to grab a photo of one of these things, and the things that some of course there's some hoaxes out there which definitely discredit the whole cryptozoology research group with hoaxes, and hopefully people, one hoax does a lot of damage, but a very elusive creature.
Absolutely. The Patterson and Giblin film that you were referring to, is the only really true evidence, so to speak, that we have of this creature. We have a copious amounts of casts of trackways, but that really doesn't hold a lot of water. Science and the everyday citizen wants a little bit more than just tracks and blob squatches, these blurry little pictures of what may or may not be a Sasquatch. So outside of the Patterson-Giblin film, we really have not much to go on. No pertinent DNA evidence, which is going to close the book on this thing. And as you said, the hoaxes. There have been hoaxes perpetrated out there, because technology is becoming so advanced, and we can start spreading pictures around the world in a matter of seconds. People are perpetrating hoaxes that get out there as factual, builds up a lot of steam. The media starts becoming involved, and then it proves that it's a hoax. So, it discredits nearly everybody in this very fringe field of cryptozoology. And that's what we do not need. So as an investigator, that's the way I want to go on. I do not want to jump to conclusions. I want to be skeptical every step of the way. And I actually want, if I do uncover anything, I want the creature to prove itself to me, so that I can, in turn share it to the world. So in regards to my writings, what I do is I look from a very historical perspective on different types of encounters, whether they be the encounters of a dog man or Bigfoot or UFOs, put them into a historical perspective, right. Figure out the environment in which this was, which the encounters took place. I'll look at the perspective of the eyewitnesses and the psychology that might be going into the incident, and kind of compiling all this evidence to produce some sort of, I guess you would, a clearer picture of what may or may not be going on. As I said, I'm very, very skeptical, even though I've had a couple of experiences myself, but I still, like I said, I still have to be skeptical, but I still have an open mind at the same time.
Well, and I think there's nothing, I don't think there's anything wrong. I think there's definitely, and I fall in the same category, Ron, there's being skeptical, and then there's a skeptic. I think a lot of the skeptics are debunkers. They just want to say anything that's out of the norm. There's an explanation for it, or no, it's this or it's that. But I think being skeptical is the trait of a good researcher, where you start eliminating a lot of simple things, like you said, whether it's a UFO sighting. Kind of take out all of the knowns and narrow it down to the unknowns, and then look at it from a few different angles.
That's right, and you've hit the nail on the proverbial head. You cannot go into anything and just say point blank that it does not exist. That doesn't help anybody. What's going on in the world is we want to get away from superstition. At least that's the way science and mainstream society is starting to look. They're poo-pooing religion. They're looking at any aspect of another type of reality as being complete, just a mythology. So what's going on is they're taking away not only our imaginations, but they're taking away any quest for the unknown. So we're starting off already on the wrong foot, because we're saying that unequivocally nothing of this ilk exists, and that's a bad thing. So kids are now being raised not to have this this joy of the world, but to look at it from a very narrow scientific perspective and think in terms of definites. And definites are never a good thing. I prefer to hedge my bets in any which way that I can, so I always like to leave room for error. There's invariables in everything. If you're looking at this from a very mathematical equation, there's invariables. None of this is going to add up as 1 + 1 = 2. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
This world is a vast area, a vast planet. And I like to quote Shakespeare whenever he says, "There's more things in heaven and earth that are dreamt of in our philosophy," and that is true. Even our oceans aren't as explored. I just finished up a book called On Mermaids, which should be published by Monica Books in about a month or two. And in the researching of the world of the mermaid, to think about, that we know more about the surface of the moon than we do about the depths of our ocean.
True.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the same way with our planet. I mean, there are places in the United States that are not explored. There's places in the United States, of course, that are mapped, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're explored. There's inaccessible places. There's places where nobody wants to go because of the terrain. And if there is a self-aware, deliberately elusive animal out there, it could, maintain some sense of if you go into hiding and not be found if it wanted to. But as you said before, I also like to look into the ideas of an interdimensionality. I studied in college the idea of the fairy world, which I like to term the goblin universe, although I did not come up with that term. And it's this idea that creatures might exist beyond our grasp because they live in another dimension that borders our world, and every now and then there's a slippage between the two worlds. And that seems a little outlandish, but again, science, the great atheistic science, is proving that there may be worlds out there, and dimensions out there, from the very research that it's doing itself. So it's great to see that some of our ideas of interdimensionality, which was considered so outlandish, is now being at least conjectured by science that this might be possible.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, Ron, because, a key, I was looking at just some information on your book, Unexplained World of Chestnut Ridge, talk about local folklore. And, it's interesting here in Utah, we have a lot of activity, and I'm gonna call it paranormal. Not normal is probably the best thing in the Uinta Basin. Of course, that's where the famous Skinwalker Ranch is. People report, so many different things. The wolf dog, portals, light strings that appear with something coming in and out of them. Of course, all kinds of lights in the sky, different types of creatures. But some of these areas, and I'm not sure in western Pennsylvania, but you could maybe let me know, some very highly spiritual areas with Native American people that have been there for ages and ages and ages, and have kind of figured things out, especially figured things out about Mother Earth and respecting things. I think today's society, sadly, when we find something that's out of the ordinary, instead of appreciating it for what it is or appreciating it where it came from, the state of human, I don't know if I want to say thought or the roadmap we follow is, oh wow, there's something unique. Let's go tear it apart. Let's dissect it and find out what it is. We don't tend to leave things alone, and maybe some of these folklore, some of this ancient stuff is smart enough, if you will, to elude us a little bit, and maybe these Bigfoots and other things fall into those categories.
Without a doubt. And I must tell you that it is a pleasure to do a talk show with somebody as knowledgeable as yourself. Sometimes you go through this and having to go about explaining yourself the entire time to someone that may not know exactly, what they're talking about. So I will applaud you on your knowledge and of this field. It's quite quite refreshing to have somebody like you doing an interview with me. So I do appreciate that very much, my friend.
Well, thank you.
Yes, but that is absolutely the case. Western Pennsylvania. I mean, I've of course studied the Skinwalker Ranch, and before the white man came there, this was a very spiritual place for the Native American. It might have been a forbidden place, but it was one of these places that was accepted as being outside the realm of normality. You know, there's something going on here. We don't quite understand it. It's better just to stay away from it. You know, so there was this awe attachment to it. Now, the place where I grew up in, actually, to tell you the truth, we actually moved. My family and I moved about 2 months ago, right to the foot of the Chestnut Ridge, because I've been doing so much research on this area that I thought that I needed to be a little bit closer. So my area of research is actually out my front door. But same way with the Chestnut Ridge. Now, there was a lot of Indian tribes around this area during the French and Indian War. Now, they were mercenaries, of course, for the British and the French, but before that, there was the Monongahela's. Now, this was an Indian tribe that completely vanished by about 1500. One writer said that this is the greatest archaeological mystery that has ever happened in Pennsylvania, because a whole culture had completely disappeared. And what filled that vacuum was Indians that were coming down from Canada that were basically fighting for, you know, on the sides of the colonists in the French and Indian War. But there were Indian mounds. This was a mound building culture around this area, and they have all been plowed over, and it's very, very sad. I studied the mound building cultures, and we can see great evidence of the Adena culture and the Fort Ancient culture in Ohio at places like the Seat Mound and the Serpent's Mound, which is the great effigy mound in Chillicothe, Ohio. And I even had the chance to study in Cahokia, which is in Carbondale, Illinois, right across the Mississippi from St. Louis. And this was a great, vast Indian empire built around the mound building culture, the Mississippian culture, as a matter of fact. But yes, my area of Western Pennsylvania was indeed an area that was imbued with a sacredness. There were Indian mounds here. The Chestnut Ridge was a place that was viewed as a place that was set aside from the rest of nature. And there was phenomena reported here since the time that the first white settlers moved into the area. One of the first reports was calling it the howling wilderness, you know. And they spoke about the terrible noises that would come off of the Chestnut Ridge at night. Now, looking at it from an 18th century perspective, they were viewing it as the Native Americans making some of these noises. But, you know, as a researcher, you have to think, well, you know, was it completely man-made noises, or was some of the howls they were hearing is some of the howls that we're hearing even to this day, which people are saying that are Bigfoot, or, you know, the Dogman, or these giant black cats that are being reported, these kind of alien animals. And I just find histories of different places very good evidence that something out of the ordinary has been happening for quite some time, just like the Skinwalker Ranch.
One of our listeners emailed in for you, Ron, said, Ron, have you ever, in your research, have you ever come across any of these creatures or seen anything similar to a Bigfoot?
Well, I'll tell you, and that's a great question, and I think that's something that every researcher is asked. So if I may, I'll give you a brief little description of my encounter. Sure. A team that I were investigating an area right around the Chestnut Ridge that used to be a very prosperous canal town. It had hotels, it had a baseball team, but in 1888, the Johnstown flood came through and destroyed a lot of the town, and by the 1950s, the Army Corps of Engineers designated this as a flood control area. They raised the town, and they use it now for flood purposes, so if there's heavy rains, they will open up the dams so places like Johnstown and Pittsburgh do not get flooded. So the civilization that was there has now been buried underwater, and the wilderness has grown. Actually, nearly any trace of humanity has been erased from the surface of the area. So to this very day, there are strange reports of werewolf sightings, of Bigfoot sightings. So my team and I, after doing research on the history of the area, decided to go about doing an investigation. So as we were going, the typical things of ghost hunting, the ghost hunting, I guess you would call it the tradition started to occur to us. Our batteries were being drained. Electronic equipment wasn't working. Something strange was going on. And then something very odd happened. Over our heads, and it looked like it was low enough that if you had a large enough ladder, you could probably climb up and touch it. But it appeared as if static electricity was going off in the atmosphere very close to above our heads, maybe 12 feet above us. And it almost appeared the same kind of static electricity whenever you would pull a blanket off the bed at night. That kind of activity was going on. So we were, nothing was working. None of our equipment was working. None of our recording equipment was working. So we decided to return to our little base camp. And one of the reasons why I wanted to return to the base camp is I was starting to get very, very scared. Now, I'm not a foolish person. If I feel, there's some sort of rumbling in my stomach, something is not right, I will definitely take off, because I put my own safety far ahead of any kind of anything that I might uncover. So as we were turning around, our equipment starts working again, and a light about 11 feet off the ground materializes. It looks almost as if it is a flare coming on. It ignites, the sparks are coming everywhere, and then it fades off. It almost clicks off like it snaps the finger, which we actually recorded. So this actually was caught on tape. So, but it was so out of the ordinary that we thought that it had to be man-made. It had to be somebody from our base camp that was making this kind of light. So we started hollering out, hey, one of the psychics that we were was with us on this endeavor. Her name was Dolores. We started calling out for Dolores, and out of the woods to my left, I hear my name being called, Ron. And I said to my partner, his name was Ryan. I said, Ryan, did you hear that? And he said, yes, I heard it. So we assumed that somebody was out there. It was one of our groups. So we start walking a little bit further, and off to the right, we hear a movement in the woods. Heavy movement. We could not see anything, but immediately within our minds, we knew whatever it was there was a quadruped. It was down on all fours. And the images that flash in our minds, both my mind and in Ryan's mind, my partner's mind, was eyes, teeth, and a very bestial, maleficent. This thing was out to get us. There was a terror involved there. Now, of course, we did not see this creature, but whatever was in the woods to our right was somehow instilling within us what it was. So we start walking. Well, at this point, we were actually running away from the sounds, and whatever had called my name was the way that led us away from the creature that we felt was actually pursuing us. So that was the one instance that I had, and this is what opened me up to the idea of the Cartesian theater of the mind, named after Rene Descartes. That there is a way in which the mind can be manipulated so that our perception of reality is somehow changed. That whatever was in the woods, whether it was using infrasound, which is a scientifically proven method of communication by mammals such as elephants and, of course, reptiles such as crocodiles use it. But infrasound is used by mammals. And in one report done by MSNBC, the researchers claimed that infrasound can produce in an individual what they deemed, quote unquote, paranormal feelings. So it starts opening my mind about what exactly is out there. And so whatever the creature was able to instill within us what it wanted us to think that it appeared like. It was able to manipulate us into believing what it looked like, and we knew to get out of there. So this now leads me into a whole other realm of research, and that is the idea of the world, like I told you, of the fairy, of the goblin research. Now, I don't want anybody to think that I'm talking about, the Tinkerbell, the typical Marilyn Monroe with diaphanous wings little creature. I'm talking about something that has been out there since the very beginning of time, which, very ancient cultures have been talking about. Paracelsus, called it the elemental, that this is something that is in nature. And then what happens if all the things that we're researching out there, from Dogman to Bigfoot, in some cases even aliens, is actually from this world of the elements, that is from the goblin universe, and through some means of psychic transmission is able to make itself appear different than what it is. Now, the medieval term for this would be glamour, where we get our word glamour from right now in relation to makeup and high fashion and such. But to the medieval mind, glamour was a way to mask somebody's true appearance. And if there is a creature out there, I like to genetically call it a puka. That was a very European term for these type of shape-shifting little creatures. We see in William Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream the character of Puck, which is actually a variation of the puka. And if you would look at this linguistically, in the places such as in Massachusetts, in the triangle up there, the Great Paranormal Triangle up in Massachusetts, we have a creature up there called the Puckwedgie, which I find very interesting, that the root of the Puckwedgie actually has the word puck in it, which could be a derivation of puka, which led me to believe that maybe this is the name that the creatures themselves are calling one another, and we as humanity had picked up on it. But so my research now is dealing in the possibility that there is a creature out there that may be able to influence the way we think. And if it's able to do that, then why couldn't it project into our minds that it is an 8-foot-tall, man-like creature covered in hair, or a four-legged man-wolf, or a giant bird, or a black cat, or a hellhound? And in doing research, I found out in places like Ireland and Scotland and England, these pukas have been known to shapeshift into giant eagles, or into black cats, or into a myriad of other different forms. And it just is a very interesting level of research that I'm at right now. And I will probably be following this line of research for quite some time, because, as I said, I had just recently wrote the book on mermaids, and I was looking at archetypes of mermaids. But this whole idea of shape-shifting also occurs within that line of cryptid as well. So I think there's a lot to be said and a lot to be done on there. So that's what I'm doing right now. Actually, before I took your call tonight, I'm researching a new book on the Dogman, and that's what I was following right now, about the very, very ancient notion of something called therianthropy, which is the shape-shifting from man to beast. And we can see in the cave paintings of Lascaux what appears to be a man shape-shifting into an animal, in some cases a bison, in most cases in the upper Paleolithic. It appears to be some sort of sympathetic magic where the shaman is changing form into a game animal. But I still think it's a very fascinating that from the very beginning of humanity we have at least the understanding that it's possible to shape from one state of being into another.
I'll tell you, Ron, you've definitely done your homework without a doubt. One comment I'd like to make and get your take on this. We've talked about, of course, cryptozoology, and kind of talked a little bit about the paranormal world, but something that I find interesting, and I don't know if it can fall within the same category of this, as far as how an entity, if you want to call it, can present itself. But in the UFO, especially in the abduction scenarios, I've talked to many people that have gone, that I truly believe something has happened to them, where they claim that, during their normal day while they're going about their normal business, they'll look up in the sky, something will prompt them, and there can be a very large craft, maybe, flying near their car or above their car, or they're walking and they see this thing, and they will ask others if they see it, and the answer, of course, is no, where these craft are only shown, if you will, to certain individuals. And I kind of wonder if that falls into that realm as well. We talk about extraterrestrials. Doesn't mean that they can't be mythical, or maybe not mythical, but maybe dimensional creatures that can shift and move through time and dimensions. And it
without a doubt. And again, that is where my research is leading me. Whenever I look at anything, like I said, I like to look from the very genesis of the idea of extraterrestrials or for abductions. And whenever I was reading Whitley Strieber's, his notes on his abductions, he said that his abductions had a very natural feel to them. There was the smell of cinnamon and earth. It was a very earthy sensation. Well, I came across the records of a pastor. His name was Kirk, in Aberfoyle, Scotland, in the 1600s, who was walking through the woods and came upon a mound in the woods with a light emanating out of a door. Now, to the 21st century mind, we immediately think something technological is going on, and this is obviously a UFO. But to the Renaissance mind, who did not have any kind of inkling of any kind of technology, he saw it as something purely natural. He goes to investigate it. He is beguiled by the light. He enters the mound, which he described as a fairy mound. And inside that mound, he sees inhabitants. One of the forms of an inhabitant was a very tall, beautiful, humanoid type of character, which could be described by a lot of people as a Nordic, and also a more uglier little small creature, which for all the world sounds like a gray. But he was reporting this back in the 1600s. He did not look at it with trepidation or fear. He saw it as something very natural. And also, because he was a man of God, he saw it as not even outside of the realm of creation. This was something, that God ordained. And that man, as a matter of fact, has vanished off the face of the earth. And many people think that he went into the fairy world and never returned. So we do have these accounts coming from Europe in the Renaissance. And even before that, we find things in the Middle Ages. And we find things even in the ancient text of creatures that appear out of nowhere and materialize and dematerialize, in the sense of flying. But we are looking at it from a 21st century perspective. So I'm thinking that if these creatures are indeed able to manipulate our thoughts, all they have to do is implant a seed, and we basically do the rest. Our mind constructs the world around this basic little implantation of what we are seeing. And because we are so educated nowadays, and because we are, always on cell phones and iPads and computers, that we automatically put a little bit of technology into everything that we see. So if we were walking through the woods and we saw a light coming out of the ground, and there is an implant of some sort of, I don't like to use the word cloaking mechanism because it sounds too science fiction, but if, these creatures are able to obtain some sort of elusiveness by implanting a thought within us, then if we see a mound with a light coming out of it, we automatically assume that it is a UFO. So our experience becomes a UFO experience rather than a fairy experience, because we are a technological society.
Interesting. Very interesting. I find the whole subject of abduction and scenario, the abduction scenario and contact scenario, the contactee scenario, so interesting because again, people who have gone through it have so many different perspectives. And then, of course, you throw sleep paralysis, which is something that a lot of people experience. But I just find it quite interesting because there's so much to that whole subject.
Right. In no way am I taking away the impact of stories of people who claim abduction. I have interviewed people that are actually very shaken by it. This was a traumatic event. They are in tears. And what I am trying to explain to these folks is in no way do I see them as liars whatsoever. Even if it did not physically take place, to them, this was a physical incident. What occurred to them was very private and was very life-changing. So whether it actually happened or it was imagined that it happened, it was still a real event to this person, and it's worthy of study. And I think that it's actually worthy of mainstream scientific study about what's going on because it is actually getting into the very workings of the human mind, why this happens. But yes, whenever you discuss sleep paralysis, yeah, I mean, that is a thing that people can physiologically experience something that is actually not there. But I'm, as I said in my research, this is also a way by which, a being that is either from this world or from another dimension can also go about its life or its life ways by interacting with our world, by staying hidden, by implanting ideas that it's not there, it's, a nightmare or what have you. And, we can see this in art, like Fazeli's great painting, very Gothic painting of the nightmare with this imp setting up on top of a sleeping woman's chest. So this has been explored in art, and this has been explored in literature throughout the ages. I mean, this has been part of the human consciousness for so long, is working out about what is going on. It's nothing new, and we should study it. And continue the heritage of studying it because it is so worthy of getting to the bottom about what is going on.
Without a doubt. Ron, where can our listeners, just want to throw that out there, where can our listeners get your books?
Well, you can actually get them from Barnes & Noble, but I'll tell you what, they're not going to probably carry them, so you would have to order them through there. So it's going to be more expensive to do it that way. So I tell everybody to just simply go to Amazon. Amazon.com, that's how you get everything done. And you can order them from there. So you can look up Ronald L. Murphy Jr., or you can look up, my books. I have The Unexplained World of the Chestnut Ridge, which is dealing with the paranormal world of Western Pennsylvania. But I also throw in, it's kind of like the way I spoke tonight about bringing in different European cultures and other cultures of the way they see the phenomena as well, and tying them in to the incidences that are occurring in Western Pennsylvania. And I also have a book out called The Pack, which is a fictionalization of the Dogman mythos, but I'm still working within the realm and the parameters of the actual research of that. But it is, in the end, a horror novel. And I will have a couple more books coming out. I will be coming up The Haunted Trails of Westmoreland County, which is another regional book that should be out probably by the summertime, and On Mermaids and On Dogmen should be out by April. But I have about 6 books out, but only several of them are related to the paranormal. So I also have a book of poetry out, of mainstream poetry. So I mean, if anybody's interested in that, feel free to look that up as well.
You run the whole gamut.
Well, you know what? I'm 46 years old, and I've had an interest in many, many things in my life. So I said to myself about 5 or 6 years ago, why don't I act upon this? So many people have all these dreams and aspirations, and they simply don't act upon it. So I thought, gosh darn it, I am going to try to see what I can do, and I've been moderately successful at it, and I'm really, really enjoying my life right now.
Now, do you do conferences and appearances as well, too, Ron?
I do, yes, my friend, I do. I appeared at the East Coast Paracon in Scranton, Pennsylvania last October, and
Okay.
I will be there again this September. In April, I will be at the Butler Paranormal Conference put on by the Butler Organization for Paranormal Research and the Center for Cryptozoological Research, which I'm a member of right now. And I will also be appearing in October at Gretchen's Walk, and that's in East Liverpool, Ohio, and we will be discussing some of the ghost legends that are surrounding that area. And there will be a few other places around in Pennsylvania. So, but if anybody wants to follow me, feel free to go to Ronald L. Murphy Jr. That's my Facebook page. They can like me on there and follow me. And if somebody wants to email me, Ronald L. Murphy Jr. Jr. at yahoo.com. They can feel free to email me there. I also have a Wix site, Ronald L. Murphy Jr. Ronald L. Murphy Jr. It's a complicated thing. But yeah, so you can go to my Wix site, my Facebook site. You can just directly email me. I would be glad to talk to anybody about anything. I look forward to talking to people with various interests and questions.
Well, I'll tell you, my friend, you've surely done your due diligence, and I can tell the passion that you have for it, and I commend you for doing the work that you do and getting the stuff out there. And what I really like to hear is that how you tie back things in history. You know, so many people, again, the skeptics, the debunkers, they talk so much about, well, this didn't exist, this is a figment of somebody's imagination, what have you. But there's a lot of these events that happen, a lot of things that happen that people see. They're not crazy, they're not nuts. They've seen some of these things, and they've been recorded through history. And I think it's great that you do the historical research and let people go back and say, you know, what you're talking about it's not a one-of-a-kind thing. It's happened before. It's happened in the past. Let me lay the work out for you. Here's the analysis. Here's the facts. Go take a look and you decide. But a lot of this stuff has already been seen, drawn, painted, written about for centuries.
Well, I thank you for that. But yeah, that's basically the nuts and bolts of what I try to do. I will try to trace it back in the human thought and human imagination. You know, if you would like to look at it from the Jungian perspective of the collective unconscious, I like to deal within that parameter as well too. But I like to work within the paradigms of the human mind, and we've had the same mind in our heads for probably the past 50 or 60,000 years. So the same thoughts that we have now are the same thoughts that, you know, what we call primitive man had as well too. So it's very interesting that, you know, they were seeing the same things that we're seeing to this day. So, you know, let's try to flush it out a little bit and see what was going on.
Well, and again, it also gives credibility to people that one thing I think that's great is, you know, it sounds like from a young age that your family encouraged the curiosity. I think one thing that happens, and I try to preach this as much as possible, you know, so many times young children especially, they talk about their imaginary friends. And of course, I think, society wants to quell that. And I think it's good when a parent comes out and says, you know, let's hear about your imaginary friend. What did you see? Not, hey, you're crazy or shut your mouth, because that happens so often. And children, I think, are really affected by that because they have seen something. They have experienced something. And now they've got a figurehead. They've got an adult that's instantly quelling that and shutting them down and maybe even embarrassing them for bringing up those things. And I think that's so sad.
It is, and that's probably one of the greatest tragedies that you can do to a child is take away their opinion, and not only their opinion, but their very emotional perspective of the situation. That's a terrible travesty to commit against a child, you know. And my children, I take them out looking for Bigfoot all the time. You know, it's in the daylight, and I know that it's going to be safe. I would never take them into a dangerous situation. But, you know, we're still looking for Bigfoot. I'm still carrying on the tradition that my mother had carried, you know, had given to me. So we're still out there with open minds. And it was my daughter's Willow's continual questions about mermaids and her love for mermaids that led me to write the book so I could get to the bottom of some of her questions. So, yeah, my kids are still very influential in the way I research to this very day.
Well, and I think it's good that you encourage the young mind and the open mind to go out and take a look at things, make their own decisions. Don't don't put your ideas or thought. Let them explore. Let them see things, and if they see something that's a little bit out of the ordinary, instead of which you do, you don't shut them down or belittle them or put them into a category. You say, hey, let's talk about it. Let's find out. Ron, I want to thank you so much for coming on, and I would like to have you back on again after a few conferences in the summertime again in your other books and talk more, if that'd be okay with you.
My friend, I would love to. Just give me a call, shoot me an email. I look forward to talking to you again in the future, my friend.
All right. I appreciate you coming on the show. Have a great week, and God bless, and let's stay in touch.
Hey, God bless you too, my friend.
Okay,
Thank you.
Take care. Good night.
Bye-bye.
All right, researcher Ronald L. Murphy, Jr. You can look him up. I found him putting his name, author. Again, he's got a couple of different books out. Roland, Dragonslayer, The Pack, The Tormented, 10 Tales of Terror. One of his latest books, Unexplained World of the Chestnut Ridge, A Hike Through the Goblin Universe of the Laurel Highlands